Hi all, am I audible? Yes, hello everyone. Very good afternoon. My name is CS Rajit Sharma. I'm part of TaxMan's R&D team. I welcome you all for today's webinar. The theme for today's webinar is changes and significance of new labor codes. We know that recently there has been major reforms in the labor law. On the recommendation of the Second National Commission on Labor, the central government proposed to replace 26 existing labor laws with 4 codes to simplify and modernize labor regulations. The major challenges was to facilitate employment growth while protecting workers' rights. The labor codes which were passed in both houses of parliament and which received the assent of the president are codes on wages, industrial relation codes, social security code, and occupational safety, health, and working conditions code. In today's session, we'll cover the changes and significance of the new code in respect of industrial relations code, code on social security, occupational safety, health, and working condition code. So today we have with us panel of experts on labor law. We are privileged to have with us Ms. Pooja Ramchandani. Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming and bestowing us with your presence. Ms. Ramchandani is a partner at the Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas and heads the labor law and employment law practice. Her area of expertise encompasses a range of matter in the field of employment and labor laws. Our other guests are Mr. Vaibhav Bhardwaj, Principal Associate at Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas. Mr. Bhardwaj presently works with the merger and acquisition team and specializes in employment law. At the firm, he works on matters pertaining to employment law advisory. Our other guest is Ms. Kriti Kaushik. She is Principal Associate at the firm. Ms. Kaushik advises on the issues pertaining to termination of employees, employment policies, disciplinary guidelines, regulatory framework, including overtime work hours, leave, holidays, etc., contract labor, and severance of upper management. So during the webinar, you may put your questions in the chat box and our team will answer to them separately. Now, I would like our guest speaker, Ms. Pooja Ramchandani, to take it from here. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are all safe and well. As you are aware, reforms in employment laws have gathered momentum with the new labor codes receiving presidential assent. The wage code received presidential assent last year in August, and we saw the other 3 codes on industrial relations, social security, occupational safety, health, and other working conditions code receive presidential assent on September 23rd this year. This brings us to the question on when will these codes be enforced. The date of enforcement of these codes will be notified in the official gazette. It's likely that once the rules under the codes, which are currently circulated for public comments, are passed by the Houses of Parliament, the codes will be enforced together with the rules. This is anticipated to happen around April next year. To give you a quick summary of how this changes the labor law landscape, the Code on Wages will consolidate 4 legislations, namely the Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Wages Act, Payment of Bonus Act, and the Equal Remuneration Act. The Code on Social Security will subsume the laws relating to EPF, ESI, gratuity, maternity benefit, employees' compensation, BOCW Cess Act, Cine Workers Welfare Fund, and the Unorganized Workers Social Security laws. The Code on Industrial Relations will replace the ID Act, Standing Orders, and Trade Union Act. Finally, the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code will amalgamate 13 laws, which include the Factories Act, Contract Labor Act, Interstate Migrant Workers Act, BOCW, and others that you can see on the screen. In today's session, we will be speaking about the key changes under the Industrial Relations, Social Security, and OSH Code. Since the rules under these codes are in the stage of gathering public comments, we will not be covering the rules. I will speak on the Industrial Relations Code, followed by Kriti, who will take you through the Social Security Code, and Weber will discuss the OSH Code. So starting with the IR Code, much like the existing regime, the IR Code seeks to protect workers on their layoff, retrenchment, and termination of employment due to reduction of workforce or closure. The IR code also prescribes the conditions for transfer of workers on account of transfer of an establishment, so as to secure favorable conditions of employment on their transfer. It provides for protection of employment during pendency of proceedings, prohibits unfair labor practice, and sets out the mechanism for raising grievances, disputes, and its resolution. The IR code aims to provide flexibility to smaller organizations to restructure their workforce, streamline the adjudication process, and digitization for effective enforcement and ease of compliance. Let's start with some of the key changes in important definitions. The definition of employer has been broadened to include contractor and legal representative of the deceased employer. This has provided greater clarity and also protection to workers at the same time, now that the buck doesn't stop with the death of the employer. The term worker in the IR code has replaced the term workman used in the Industrial Disputes Act and has broadened to include working journalists, sales promotion employee, in addition to those who are employed in any industry to do any manual, skilled, unskilled, technical, operational, clerical, or supervisory work for hire or reward, but excludes apprentices, those employed in managerial or administrative capacity as was defined earlier. But the change here is in relation to the supervisory capacity, where the current regime prescribes 10,000 rupee as the threshold and the IR code prescribes 18,000. The effect of this would be that a larger number of employees could be categorized as workmen and claim protections under the IR code. Next is mass casual leave by 50% or more workers employed in an industry has been included under the term strike. This changes advantages from an employer's perspective, as it would help in thwarting illegal strikes. The definition of industrial disputes has been expanded to include any dispute between an individual worker and an employer in relation to discharge, dismissal, retrenchment, or termination of such worker, which was not earlier provided. The term wages in the code is in the IR code is the same as prescribed under the wage code, so that has provided uniformity in terms of definitions across the codes. The IR code has brought about a change in the definition of the term industry and consequently the applicability of the chapter on standing orders. This new definition is similar to the definition of industry passed by the Parliament in 1982, but which did not come into force. The term industry under the code means a systematic activity organized by cooperation between employer and employee for production or distribution of goods and services calculated to satisfy human wants and wishes with or without investment of capital or motive of gain or profit. It, however, specifically excludes institutions owned or managed by organizations engaged in any charitable, social, or philanthropic services. It also specifically excludes sovereign functions and domestic services, which was not specifically defined earlier, and it was not the case earlier. For the purposes of applicability of the standing orders, the term industrial establishment has undergone a sea change. The present law prescribes specific types of industries to fall under the purview of Industrial Standing Orders Act and also prescribe for industries notified by the government. Now, under the IR code, the chapter on standing orders will apply to all businesses which fall under the definition of the term industry. This change has obviated the need to verify whether a business is notified or not. The IR code has also specifically recognized fixed-term employment for all industries and provides for at-par treatment of fixed-term employees with permanent employees. The IR code provides that a fixed-term worker should be treated at par with permanent worker in terms of hours of work, wages, allowances, and other benefits where the work is done is the same or of similar nature. Therefore, a fixed-term employee will be eligible for all statutory benefits in proportion to the period of service rendered. This is similar to the Social Security Code, which also envisages payment of proportionate gratuity to fixed-term employees. It's important to mention here that fixed-term employment was introduced for all sectors by the Ministry of Labour and Employment by its notification in the year 2018, which amended the Industrial Employment Standing Order Central Rules. In furtherance of introduction of the definition of fixed-term employment, the definition of retrenchment has also been expanded to specifically exclude from its purview the situation of completion of tenure of a fixed-term employment. Now let's move on to some other significant changes. A new concept of sole negotiating union or negotiating council has been introduced in the IR code. Thus far, apart from the Maharashtra Recognition of Trade Unions and Prevention of Unfair Labour Practices Act, the law did not provide for a formal process of recognition of trade unions. The Trade Unions Act prescribed the process for registration and establishments of trade unions only. This introduction should enable a more streamlined process of recognition and collective bargaining. As per the IR code, where there is only one registered trade union, such trade union will be recognized by the employer as a sole negotiating union of workers. In case of multiple registered trade unions, the trade union having support of 51% or more of the workers in an establishment will be recognized as the sole negotiating union. However, if no trade union has support of 51% or more workers, then there will be a negotiating council which will be constituted, which will comprise of representative of registered trade unions, which have the support of at least 20% of the workers in an establishment. Details pertaining to matters for negotiation, membership, facilities to be provided to the negotiating union or council by an establishment will be prescribed through the rules. Moving on to the changes in respect of standing orders. Several changes have been brought about in this regard. The central government, as opposed to appropriate government, which could have been either central or state, under the present Standing Orders Act, have been empowered to prepare the model standing orders. So therefore, it will be the central government who will prescribe the model standing orders. Employers are now required to consult the trade union or the negotiating council or union, as the case may be, in respect of the draft of standing orders before it is submitted for certification. Under the present Standing Orders Act, as is also the case in the IR code, trade unions are asked for objections by the certifying officer only after submission of the draft. So this change could possibly help in an expedited process of certification. The code further provides that standing orders will be deemed to be certified if within 60 days the certifying officer does not complete the procedure for certification, which was not the case earlier. It also provides that in case an employer adopts model standing orders, then such model standing order shall be deemed to have been certified, and the employer shall forward such information to the concerned certifying authority that it has adopted the model standing orders. Now, there's a change in terms of the number of members in the grievance committee, where it was 6 under the Industrial Disputes Act. It has been increased to 10. It also says that there must be proportionate women representation. Now, the IR code will replace the existing adjudicating bodies under the Industrial Disputes Act, that is the Court of Inquiry, Board of Conciliation, and Labor Courts, with conciliation officers and industrial tribunals. These tribunals will have 2 members, 1 judicial member and 1 administrative member, as opposed to 1 member under the ID Act. Interestingly, there's also a limitation of 2 years prescribed from the date on which an industrial dispute arose for entertaining conciliation proceedings. Another change in the IR code is the requirement of a prior notice of 14 days to be given to employers before going on strike. This requirement is only for public utility services under the ID Act. This is a very important change, as now employers will be in a better position to prepare themselves and negotiate with the workers or the workers' union for circumventing a strike and disrupting continuity of operations. The most controversial change of all is the increase in the threshold for applicability of standing orders and the permission for retrenchment, closure, and layoff from 100 to 300. But as you know, 15 states in India have already increased the threshold of compliance with the permission, where currently in 15 states, this permission is not required and the number threshold has already been increased from 100 to 300. There's also flexibility provided to the government to increase the retrenchment compensation in the future as per the IR code. Further, an exception to providing prior notice of change in conditions of service has found its place in the IR code. In case of emergent situations which require change of shift or shift working, but this is with the condition that it has to be in consultation with the grievance redressal committee, or also if such change is effected in accordance with the orders of the appropriate government. Another new aspect added in the IR code is which is going to benefit workers, is the setting up of a reskilling fund for training of retrenched workers. Employers will be required to contribute 15 days wages on the basis of the last earned salary to this fund. The retrenched employee would get paid from the fund within 45 days of retrenchment. This amount of 15 days wages is in addition to the retrenchment compensation. This introduction plays an important role, especially in the present times where the count of the number of people who've lost their jobs in the current pandemic scenario is significantly high. A reskilling fund will enable those who have been thrown into unemployment to reskill or upskill themselves and to make themselves employable again in different fields. However, the introduction of this reskilling fund will be possibly heavy on the pockets of an employer, whoever decides to restructure its workforce and downsize. The IR code also provides that the central or the state government may exempt any new establishment or a class of new establishments from all or any of the provisions of the code in public interest. Any such exemption will be for a specified period only. Now, while this is definitely going to help in ease of doing business for startups, one cannot forget that labor laws are for the protection of workers and have always been interpreted benevolently. Any exemption granted by the government under this clause from complying with the provisions would not be to derogate from these fundamental principles and will definitely come with certain conditions and stipulations for protection of workers. Further, in order to promote digitalization, the IR code, like other labor codes, introduces electronic filings for permissions, such as the application for layoff, retrenchment closure, certification of standing orders, amongst others. Also, like other labor codes, the IR code has decriminalized first-time offenses, but has enhanced monetary penalties substantially, and also provides for compounding of offenses with monetary penalties. The penalties under the IR code for certain violations have been rationalized to make it commensurate with the gravity of the violation. To give you a few examples, imprisonment for offenses such as instigation of strike, giving financial aid for illegal strikes and lockouts, breach of the settlement or award, disclosing confidential information has been reduced from 6 months to 1 to 3 months. However, the monetary penalty has been increased from the initial 1,000 to a fine ranging from 10,000 up to 2 lakhs for these offenses. Monetary penalties for certain offenses have been increased by 10 times, such as a penalty for not taking prior permission for layoff, retrenchment, or closure has been increased up to 10 lakh for the first time offense and up to 20 lakh for subsequent offense. However, imprisonment for first time offense has been removed and has been added only for subsequent offenses. The monetary penalty for unfair labor practice has been increased up to 2 lakh from the present 1,000 rupees. Again, the imprisonment over here for first-time offenses has been removed and has been retained only for subsequent offenses. As I mentioned, the IR code has introduced an option for compounding of offenses for a sum of 50% of the maximum fine provided for offenses punishable with fine only, and for a sum of 75% for offenses punishable with imprisonment for a term of not more than 1 year or with fine. Such amounts of fine which is realized will be credited to the Social Security Fund, which will be established under the Code on Social Security. However, compounding of offense is not permitted if the offense has been repeated within a period of 5 years from commission of the same offense. As you can see, there are quite a few changes in the offering. The code promises to deliver a more streamlined process for dispute resolution and trade union recognition, an opportunity for industrial peace and harmony by introducing prior notice for strike and lockout. It also provides smaller organizations flexibility to restructure business operations more efficiently by increasing the number threshold for government approval. Decriminalization of first-time offenses and compounding of offenses will definitely put a smile on the faces of GCs and CFOs. This change will help in reduction of litigation costs to some extent. Punishment of imprisonment is like a dagger over the head and impacts ease of doing business, since it's the persons in the senior management who are the ones impacted on account of them being responsible for the ultimate control of an establishment. And it is only through protracted litigation that the senior management can absolve themselves of the liability. So while they have to, get themselves involved in the litigation, and in doing so, a lot of time of the senior management is spent. And the focus shifts from business operations to managing a crisis, apart from the increased cost, of course. Thus, this is definitely a welcome change. That said, retrenchment now will be dearer with the contribution to reskilling fund. And if the government decides to increase the retrenchment compensation in the future, then retrenchment will, of course, that will add to the retrenchment cost. And lastly, organizations should start getting themselves code ready. Once the rules are passed, as there would be some work required where the records and registers are overhauled or digitized. With this, I come to an end of my presentation. Thank you. I will now hand it over to Kriti.
Thank you, Pooja. Hello, everyone. I will be taking you through the key highlights of the Social Security Code. Under the Social Security Code, similar to the legislations that are being consolidated under the code, it will provide for welfare schemes on Provident Fund, pension scheme, EDLI. There will be insurance for sickness and disability benefits, gratuity for workers, on a continuous service of 5 years or less in some cases. There will be maternity benefit provisions for women employees. There will be cess and social security for welfare of building and other construction workers, compensation for employees and their dependents in case of occupational injury and disease. The applicability under the Social Security Code for the provisions on Provident Fund and employee state insurance will now not be restricted only to notified establishments, but to all establishments having 20 or more employees in case of Provident Fund and 10 or more employees in case of employee state insurance. With this, I would like to take you through some key definitions that have been introduced under the Social Security Code. The code has introduced some new concepts and changed the definitions of certain terms from what they were originally understood as under the extant laws. First of such definitions is the definition of employee. In keeping with the wages code, the Social Security Code also distinguishes between an employee and all other kinds of workers, which the new terms that have been introduced under the code are gig workers, home-based workers, platform workers, self-employed workers, unorganized workers, and wage workers. The term gig workers is a person who work or participates in a work arrangement or earns from such activities outside of a traditional employer-employee relationship. While this is intended to refer to short-term assignments mostly, the term traditional employer-employee relationship is not really defined under the code as yet. Platform workers, the second new term which has been introduced, is a person engaged in a form of employment in which organizations or individuals use an online platform to access other organizations or individuals to solve specific problems or provide specific services in exchange for payment. This would include Uber drivers, Zomato delivery boys, Dunzo, etc. The next concept under the Social Security Code that I would like to talk about is of career centers. The Social Security Code provides for setting up of career centers, which will also subsume the currently existing employment exchanges under the Employment Exchanges Act. These career centers will be there to provide career services to people who seek to employ other individuals, persons who seek employment, occurrence of vacancies, and persons who seek vocational guidance and career counseling or guidance to start self-employment. The third definition that we will be discussing is of building and other construction work, which will now specifically include any building or other construction work related to any establishment which employs less than 10 workers, or where such work is related to own residential purposes of an individual or a group of individuals for their own residential purposes, and the total cost of such work does not exceed the value of INR 50 lakh rupees or a higher amount as may be prescribed by the government. The fourth definition that we will take up is that of dependent, which was there also under the ESI Act. While the definition is similar to what was there under the ESI Act, the term dependent will now also include a widower and a maternal grandparent as well. The word parental grandparent is now replaced with just grandparents. So now it includes both sides of the grandparents. The definition of wages under the Social Security Code is the same as that under the wages code. The one significant part of the definition is that if excluded components exceed 50% of the total remuneration paid to the employee, the amount in excess of the 50% will be treated as wages for the purposes of calculating the contributions. This could mean increased financial outlay for the employers, unless, of course, the compensation structures are arranged in a manner that the excluded allowances do not together exceed 50% of the total remuneration. The Social Security Code also provides for wage ceiling, which would mean such amount of wages as may be notified by the central government for the purposes of becoming a member under the for taking benefit under the provisions of Provident Fund and the employee state insurance. Moving on to the administration mechanism that is provided under the Social Security Code, it provides for social security organizations, which will include a central board of trustees for Provident Fund, Pension Fund, and Employees Deposit Linked Insurance Fund. There will be ESI Corporation, as we have presently, for administration of the ESI fund, national and state social security boards for unorganized workers. There will be state building and other construction workers board for welfare schemes related to disability, pension, education, etc. for unorganized workers. And there will be other organization and special purpose vehicles which are declared to be social security organizations by the government. Moving on to some key highlights of this Social Security Code. The first one is that the code provides for single registration for all establishments covered under the code. It provides for an online registration mechanism with immediate issuance of a certificate of registration, which will substantially reduce the time taken by employers or new establishments to get themselves registered and start making contributions under these acts. The existing establishments which are already registered under the EPF and ESI would be required to just update the registration particulars on the Shram Suvidha portal within the time prescribed and would not probably require a fresh registration under the code. The code will also allow the establishments in the process of closure to apply for a cancellation of their registration. The cancellation will be subject to the employer furnishing statutory returns, pay all the statutory dues, submitting a self-certification to that effect. There isn't any clarity currently on whether the effective date of such cancellation will be linked to the intended date of closure, but one would assume that this is how it will be implemented. For assessment and determination of dues for both EPF and ESI, the code provides for a limitation period of 5 years for initiation of any inquiries, which would need to be concluded within a period of 2 years, within further extension of 1 year. This is a welcome change, as it would substantially reduce the interest liability that the employers sometimes face due to prolonged proceedings. The inquiries pending before the code comes into force will also be subsumed within the Social Security Code and would need to be concluded within a period of 2 years by the authorized officers. The rate of contribution with respect to Provident Fund will be 10% under the code, which could be increased to 12% in some cases for both employer and employee. Learning from the current situation of the ongoing pandemic, the code empowers the central government to defer or reduce the employer or employee contribution for a period of up to 3 months in both EPF and ESI in case of a pandemic or an epidemic or a national disaster. The appeals against an order with respect to determination or assessment of EPF dues, levy of damages under the EPF provisions will lie to the EPF tribunal on depositing 25% of the amount due from the employer. The appeal would be decided within a period of 1 year. There will be a limitation period of 3 years for initiating or proceeding before the ESI code with respect to any dispute on contribution or other dues under the ESI provisions under the code. There will, similar to the EPF provision, there will be a prerequisite requirement to deposit 50% of the amount due from the employer to initiate any such proceeding before the ESI code. The code does provide for easing out the transition for the employers in terms of switching from the current EPF and ESI regime to the Social Security Code, and it provides that there will be prior opportunity which will be given to the employers to comply with the code before proceeding against them for any non-compliance under the Social Security Code provisions. The wider definition of wages would definitely lead to higher increased payouts in terms of provident fund, ESI, and gratuity for the employers, and thus will result in potentially higher financial outlay for the employers. The code does come with some good news for fixed-term employees, as gratuity would now be payable to them on a pro rata basis, even in cases where they have not completed a period of 5 years of continuous service. For working journalists, the period of continuous service would be seen as 3 years instead of 5 years. In relation to building and other construction workers, the code provides for self-assessment of the employer of the cess payable on the total construction cost. Earlier, the authority would assess the cess basis of the documentation submitted by the employers, and this would result in a lot of time involvement and delay in the whole process. This would definitely be reduced with the self-assessment provision which is there under the code. Under the building and other construction welfare schemes, workers between the age of 18 to 60 years will be the beneficiaries of this scheme. And the code will require a registration of the workers with the welfare board to be able to take benefits under these schemes. Similar to this, even in the case of unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers, the code provides for a registration by these workers in order to avail the benefits under the social security schemes formulated under the code. The registration in these cases will be on a self-declaration basis by the workers. Similar to the wages code, the Social Security Code also provides for inspector cum facilitator to inspect establishments covered under the code and to advise employers and employees in relation to compliances under the code. The social security schemes for gig workers and platform workers under the code will cover matters relating to life and disability cover, accident insurance, health and maternity benefits, old age protection, creche, etc. The scheme will provide for a combination of whole or partial funding of contributions by both the central government and the aggregators, wherein the total contribution by the aggregator shall range between 1 to 2% of the total turnover of such aggregator. Further, it is provided that the contribution by an aggregator shall not exceed 5% of the amount paid by the aggregator to the gig workers and the platform workers. The aggregators, as per the schedule which has been provided under the Social Security Act, would typically include employers or establishments which are into services of ride-sharing services, food or grocery delivery, logistics services, etc. Where an employment injury result in death of the employee in case of an employee compensation provisions, the employer would be required to pay a minimum amount of INR 15,000 to the eldest surviving member of the deceased employee. Earlier, this was only a small amount of INR 2,500. So this is a good change. The Social Security Code also provides, in keeping with the easing out of the transition from the extent laws to the Social Security Code, it provides that the schemes framed under the EPF Act, such as the EPF scheme, the pension scheme, and the EDLI scheme, the ESI regulations, they will continue to remain in force for a period of 1 year after the commencement of the code. In terms of offenses and penalties, the Social Security Code provides for stringent penalties ranging from INR 50,000 to as much as 3 lakhs in case of contravention of the provisions, and a maximum imprisonment of up to 3 years. There will be the option to compound offenses by paying 50% of the maximum fine in case of offenses punishable with only fine, and 75% in case of offenses punishable with imprisonment of maximum 1 year. The option to compound offenses would be available both before and after initiation of prosecution under the code against the employer. In terms of the impact of the Social Security Code, while new definition of wages would definitely mean an increased financial outlay towards the social security contributions by employers, it would also provide for the much needed clarity on the manner of calculation of the contributions. The assessment of whether a particular allowance is universally paid or not would now not be required with the clarity in the definition that is there under the wages code and the social security code both. With the limitation period being introduced now, the exposure of defaulting employers to what past non-compliances would considerably reduce. Further, employers would now also be able to opt for suo motu rectification of non-compliances instead of waiting for initiation of inquiry by the EPF or ESI authorities and then facing substantially higher damages and penalties. The aggregator companies would need to engage into enrollment of gig workers on the portal to be created by the government to be able to provide them the benefits that will be introduced in the welfare schemes formulated under the code. Companies, as with any other new legislations, employers would be required to reevaluate their workforce structures from a risk and liability perspective and conduct cost-benefit analysis. The practice of engaging fixed-term employees only would definitely need to be revisited now. Compliances in terms of maintenance of registers and records under the extent laws would undergo an overhaul within the consolidation of laws under the Social Security Code, and in that context, the employers would probably need to revisit their documentation practices under the extent laws. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation and would hand it over to Vaibhav.
Thank you, Kriti. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. In this session, I would be apprising you all with the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020 and its impact. OSH Code provides for provisions relating to registration requirements, duties of employers, health and working conditions, welfare facilities, hours of work, annual leave, and overtime, amongst others. Now, coming to the key changes under the OSH Code, to start with, we'll start with the key changes under the definitions. First being the definition of the term establishment. The OSH Code provides a threshold for various kinds of premises to qualify as an establishment. For instance, an industry, trade, business, manufacturing, or occupation that is carried out in which 10 or more workers are employed is considered to be an establishment. However, no such threshold has been prescribed. OSH Code now would apply to all establishments where 10 or more workers are employed. This would even include commercial establishments such as IT/ITES establishments, which would also now be required to comply with the provisions of the OSH Code. Therefore, these commercial establishments which are not factories, even these establishments will particularly need to take cognizance of health and occupational safety related requirements specified in the code. Coming to the next definition, being the definition of principal employer. The definition of principal employer under the OSH Code provides for an all-encompassing definition, which basically sets out that the principal employer is with whom contract labor is employed or engaged. It states that in addition to heads, owners, occupiers of offices, factories, mines, a principal employer shall also be considered as any person responsible for the supervision and control of any kind of establishment. The next definition is the definition of worker. OSH Code provides for the definition of worker as well as the definition of employee. Worker under the OSH Code has been defined slightly differently from the existing regime. Worker means any person employed in any industry to do any manual, skilled, unskilled, technical, operational, clerical, or supervisory work, but does not include person who is employed in a managerial or administrative capacity or supervisory capacity drawing wages of more than INR 18,000. Therefore, for the OSH Code to be applicable, an establishment need to have 10 or more workers. In alignment with the definition of employee across all labor codes, the definition of employee under the OSH Code includes any person employed on wages by an establishment, either directly or even through a contractor. The definition of employee specifically includes those persons employed through a contractor, and also includes persons engaged in supervisory or managerial role. Thus, all employees would be considered as workers, but all workers would not be considered as employees. Under the revised definition of the term employee and worker, management and supervisory employees who may have been a worker for the purpose of the Factories Act would now also be specifically included. Now coming to the next definition, is the definition of manufacturing process. The OSH code has expanded the definition of manufacturing process from its existing meaning under the Factories Act to include the following processes within the definition, being composing offset, screen printing, 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional printing, prototypes, flexography, or other types of printing process or bookbinding. Moving on to the next slide, the next definition which we will be discussing is the definition of the term occupier. The OSH code has basically retained the existing definition of occupier under the Factories Act. That is the person having ultimate control of a factory, and has specifically clarified that in case of a company, any one of the directors can be designated as the occupier, except an independent director within the meaning of the Companies Act. This exception is something which is not there under the present existing regime. The next definition is of contract labor. OSH code has expanded the definition of contract labor in comparison with the existing regime by including the interstate migrant workers within its purview. Interestingly, the definition of contract labor specifically excludes a worker other than a part-time worker who's regularly employed by the contractor for any activity of his establishment on mutually accepted standards of conditions of employment on a permanent basis. This exclusion provides clarity on the ambit of contract labor as compared to the existing definition under the CRRA Act, and would provide flexibility to employers in engaging different types of workforce structure as is suited to their needs. The next definition is the definition of contractor. The OSH code narrows the scope of the definition of contractor by keeping out of its purview an independent contractor, agent, employee, or otherwise, as had been provided for earlier. The definition of contractor includes contractors who supply contract labor for any work of the establishment as mere human resource. The OSH code defines a contractor in relation to an establishment to mean a person who undertakes to produce a given result for the establishment and supplies contract labor for any work of the establishment as a mere human resource. This has been a long-standing demand of the industry to differentiate outsourcing services from a mere manpower supply arrangement. This clarification is beneficial for principal employers to ensure that they are not made liable for defaults of another employer merely because the latter provides them services with the assistance of their regular workforce. Now, the key definition which has been introduced, it's a new definition, is the definition of the term core activity. Under the current contract labor regime, the appropriate government is empowered to notify any processes, operation, work in an establishment where engagement of contract labor is prohibited, having regard to certain prescribed criteria. For example, in its application to the state of Andhra and Telangana, there is a prohibition with respect to the engagement of contract labor in core activities. The introduction of the definition of core activity and relevant provisions is an important move under the OSH code, since it now gives a relevance to engagement of contract labor. It explains that an activity for which an establishment have been set up, including an activity essential or necessary, would be considered as a core activity. To provide certain guidance on this concept, the code also sets out certain activities which would be considered as non-core activities unless an establishment has been set up to carry out those non-core activities. These non-core activities are typically in the nature of sanitation, services, courier services, housekeeping, laundry, transport services. OSH code then further goes on to stipulate that employment of contract labor in the core activities of an establishment shall be prohibited. That said, the code creates a carve-out and states that contract labor may be engaged, but for non-core activities, which we have discussed earlier, and these activities typically include sanitation, courier services, etc. Now moving on to the next slide. Next, we will talk about the key highlights of the code, which has made a significant impact on the industry. The first being common registration. The OSH code proposes one registration for an establishment instead of multiple registrations. Presently, 6 labor legislations out of the 13 which are being consolidated under the code provides for separate registration of the establishment. By this change, this will create a centralized database, promote ease of doing business, and in case an employer fails to obtain registration within the specified time period, the establishment will be deemed to have been registered on the day of expiry of the specified period. The OSH code also requires electronic application to be made before a registering officer, and such application is to be made within 60 days from the date of applicability of the OSH Act. In the current regime, no strict timeline for making such application was specified. There is under common registration only that of deemed registration has been introduced. So in case a registering officer does not grant registration with the time limit specified, then the establishment would be considered deemed registered. The OSH code specifically also prescribes that the form of the license, which is to be notified by the government, should, as far as practicable, be similar throughout the country. So this uniformity could be essential for employers who have establishments that require a license in different states from an administrative perspective. Moving on to the next slide is basically with respect to the key change with respect to interstate migrant worker. The code has brought a significant change in the definition of interstate migrant worker by including within the scope of the term a migrant worker directly recruited by an entity in one state for employment in an establishment in another state. Earlier, only migrant workers hired through a contractor were covered in this definition. Now the code has done away with this, with the intermediary or contractor. It is when the entity directly engages a interstate migrant worker from one state for its establishment in another state. In this regard, the code has also further clarified that a worker who belongs to one state and has obtained employment in an establishment in another state without being routed through an intermediary or a contract labor would also be an interstate migrant worker and be protected as an unorganized sector. Further, unlike the existing regime, the OSH code provides a wage threshold of INR 18,000 for interstate migrant workers. And under the OSH code, the central government also has the discretion to increase this threshold. For the applicability of the provisions relating to interstate migrant worker, the code provides for a number threshold of 10 interstate migrant workers. The code also specifically provides for extension of benefits that are available to workers of the establishment to even interstate migrant workers. These benefits are in the nature of ESI, Employees Provident Fund, or to provide medical checkup facility as provided to normal workers. The next is the introduction, it's safety committee. The OSH code empowers the appropriate government to require an establishment or a class of establishment to constitute a safety committee in the prescribed manner. The safety committee should consist of equal number of representatives of employers and workers engaged in such establishment. Further, the OSH code also mandates appointment of safety officers with such qualifications, and also they should perform such duties as may be prescribed by the government. These safety officers are to be appointed in every factory which has 500 workers, a factory carrying on hazardous process with more than 250 workers, or building or other construction work where 250 workers are employed. Now, the OSH code also has introduced a new concept of social security fund. Under the OSH code, there is a requirement to establish a social security fund for the welfare of the unorganized workers as defined under the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008. The amount collected as penalties for certain non-compliances under the OSH code and the amounts collected through compounding of offences under this code will be utilized for this fund. The OSH code also empowers the government to prescribe other sources as well as for funding the Social Security Fund. The entire corpus of the fund will be utilized for the welfare of the unorganized workers in a manner prescribed by the government. Now coming to the declaration of a premise as a factory, under the OSH code, the declaration of any place as a factory and the consequent application of the OSH code is now to be determined by the appropriate government as opposed to the state government, which is prescribed under the existing regime. Now, there is also the OSH code also stipulates that where premises or separate buildings are leased to different occupiers for use as separate factories, owners of the premises and the occupiers of the factories who utilize common facilities are jointly and severally responsible for providing and maintaining common services. This is a complete change from the earlier regime where liability of owners of premises alone was stipulated. This change is expected to add to the liabilities imposed on occupiers of factories. Moving on to the next slide would discuss the key changes under the working hours and overtime. Under the OSH code, the appropriate government have been given the power to prescribe requirements in relation to daily hours, weekly hours, spread over rest interval for workers. However, it will now be mandatory for an employee to obtain prior consent of the worker before requiring him or her to work overtime. Since OSH code is applicable to all establishments, there could be a conflict between the provisions of the Shops Act and the code, as the code does not replace the existing shops and establishment legislations. It is expected that the government may come up with certain clarifications in this regard. The appropriate government also may prepare an inspection scheme providing for generating web-based inspection and submission of information electronically. Such inspection scheme may also provide for assigning unique numbers to establishments and inspector cum facilitator, as is the concept in the earlier in the other codes as well. Timely uploading of inspection reports and providing for special inspections. This is vastly different from the existing regime of physical inspection under the existing regime, and in fact is similar to the regime proposed under the wages code. This measure has the potential to reduce bureaucratic inefficiencies and will positively impact the ease of doing business. Moving on to the next slide is basically with respect to the startup establishments. The appropriate government is under the code has been empowered to notify a scheme to impanel experts for the purposes of startup establishments. Such experts will be assigned for third-party audits and certifications in a randomized manner through a web-based scheme and carry out audits and certifications for the said scheme. This is a new introduction, and this is a very novel introduction and can positively impact business. On similar lines, the state governments shall constitute a state advisory board to advise the state government on such matters arising out of the administration of this code. The code has also, in the existing regime, there were multiple committees which were set up under 5 labor codes. Now, under the OSH code, all these committees will be substituted by one National Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board. The board shall advise the central government on matters relating to standards, rules, regulations to be framed under the OSH code, implementation of the OSH code, issues of policies, programs relating to occupational safety and health. Now coming to welfare facilities, different applicability threshold exists for welfare provisions like creche, canteen, first aid, welfare, etc. under the present regime. However, the OSH code provides for uniform threshold for welfare provisions for all establishments as far as practically feasible. The employer shall also be responsible to provide and maintain in his establishment such welfare facilities for the employees as may be prescribed by the central government. These are broadly facilities which are listed down in laws which would be repealed by the OSH code, especially the Plantation Labor Act of 1951. Further, additional facilities may be provided for factories, mine, docks, and building and other construction work. One key takeaway in this regard from the OSH code is that now there is a provision for separate bathing places and locker rooms for transgender employees. Now, there are also, the OSH code also sets out certain special provisions on employment of women. This would basically empower the women, help in women empowerment, and more and more, we may see more women in factories and other businesses. The OSH code has removed the restrictions imposed on employers for employing women under the Factories Act and the Plantation Act. At present, the Factories Act mandates a specific notification to be issued by state government to provide an exemption for women to work more than 9 hours in a day and to work beyond the hours of 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Subject to the condition that women will not be permitted to work between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. In contrast, the OSH code sets out a general enabling provision for women to be employed in any establishment for any work before 6 a.m. and after 7 p.m. The only condition being that the consent of the women is obtained before employing her during those times and compliance with additional safeguards relating to the safety, holidays, working hours, which of course these safeguards will also be prescribed by the appropriate government. Further, the OSH code also empowers the appropriate government to prescribe additional requirements for an employer to provide additional adequate safeguards prior to employment of women in some operations that are dangerous for their health and safety. These changes specifically with respect to employment of women during night hours would provide greater flexibility for the employment of women at all hours. And yeah. So moving on to the next slide. Next slide discusses the duties of employers and employees. Under duties of employers, in line with the Factories Act, the OSH code casts certain obligations on the employer relating to safe working environment, disposal of hazardous and toxic waste, maintenance of plant system of work, amongst others. The OSH code also provides for certain additional obligations on the employer, such as to provide free of cost annual health checkup, issue appointment letter to every employee of the establishment within the minimum information prescribed by the government, ensure disposal of hazardous and toxic waste in a prescribed manner. In addition to duties of employers, now the OSH code also casts certain duties on the employees as well, and these duties are specifically in the nature of that employees would take reasonable care for the health and safety of himself and others who may be affected by his acts or omissions at the workplace, comply with prescribed safety standards, cooperate with the employer, and report hazardous situation to the employer. So now there is also an obligation, or the employees are also duty bound for certain things. Apart from the duties, an employer under the code also has the right to obtain information from the employer relating to employees' health and safety at work and inform the employer any unhealthy or unsafe working situation. Now, there is a new concept which has been included under the OSH code, which is primarily the duties of designers and manufacturers. In addition to the above mentioned duties specifically with respect to the employers, the OSH code also imposes certain specific responsibilities on manufacturers, importers, suppliers, architects, project engineers, designers, such as non-deployment of untested articles. A fresh insertion under the OSH code has been made with regard to ensuring best standards of articles designed or manufactured outside India. In case there is no standard set in India for an article produced outside India, then the article is to conform to the standard adopted in the country from which it has been imported. Moving on to the next slide, this basically deals with exemptions in case of public emergencies, disasters, or pandemics. Drawing from the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic and in view of the unprecedented impact made by COVID-19 on businesses, The OSH code introduces certain pandemic-specific provisions. The OSH code provides that the government has the power to exempt any workplace, work activity, or class thereof from provision of the OSH code in the event of any public emergency, disaster, or pandemic in the whole or part of the country for a period of up to 1 year at a time. In this regard, public emergency has been defined, and it means a grave emergency whereby the security of the whole or any part of India is threatened by war, external aggression, or internal disturbance. Under the existing regime, which is the Factories Act, such exemption was only available in case of public emergency. Now, the government also has the power to exempt application of OSH code in public interest. This power has been given to state governments, which may exempt any new factories from provisions of the OSH code if satisfied that this is in the public interest and it is necessary to create more economic and employment opportunities. In this regard, it may be pertinent to note that the term public interest has not been defined in the OSH code. The next being power to make rules regulating general health and safety. The OSH code empowers the central government to make such rules, general safety and health of persons residing in the whole or in part of India. This is a new provision and can be viewed as a direct response to the COVID-19 crisis which is underway. Now, in an attempt toward digitalization, which is across all labor codes, OSH code also provides that the key processes may be carried out electronically, including application for registration and licenses, issue of registration certificates, intimations of amendments, sending of notice of commencement, cessation of operations, etc. All needs to be digitalized and should be sent electronically. The direct impact would be that this would assist in easier compliance and is expected to positively impact the ease of doing business objective of the country. Moving on to the next slide. Now, there are certain special provisions with respect to contract labor. It is in line employer move. The OSH code has increased the threshold for application of the chapter with respect to contract labor from 20 contract workers to 50 contract workers. Unlike the current regime, which is the Contract Labor Act, which allows state governments the flexibility to modify the threshold for the applicability of the CLRA Act, the OSH code provides a single unified threshold without granting state governments the ability to modify it. In terms of core activities, we have already discussed in detail earlier with respect to the prohibition on engaging contract workers in core activities. Another key provision code is basically in order to promote ease of doing business. There will be a common license in respect of a factory, industrial premises for BD and cigar, and for engaging contract labor or any combination thereof, with an alternative option for a single license for any one of them. In the event a principal employer employs contract labor through a contractor who's not duly licensed, the engagement of contract labor would be deemed to be in contravention of the OSH code, and penalties would be incurred by the principal employer in this regard. Accordingly, the principal employer would also have to undertake an additional step while conducting their due diligence on the contractors to check if the contractors have obtained adequate licenses. Similar to the existing provisions under the CLRA Act, the OSH code also responsibility to make payment of wages labor act. In addition to the requirements for common license, every contractor is also required to fulfill qualifications as may be prescribed by the central government. One key difference from the existing regime is wherein the liability of providing welfare facilities to contract labor in the current regime rested with the contractor. The OSH code requires principal employer of an establishment employing contract labor to provide welfare facilities to the contract labor as well. So the primary obligation has been shifted to the principal employer, which is also a key change. In light of these key provisions under the contract labor, since there would be more stringent obligations imposed on principal employers for sourcing contract labor, hence going forward, everyone would be required to do adequate due diligence checks prior to engaging any contractor. The next slide we have is on penalties. While laying down uniform penalties for non-compliance with occupational safety and health and working condition establishments, the OSH code enhances the penalties for offenses committed thereunder. Under the OSH code, there is a substantial increase in monetary penalties as well as introduction of compounding provisions. The general penalty has been provided in the form of a fine, which shall not be less than INR 2 lakhs, but which may extend to INR 3 lakhs. Under the OSH code, penalties by way of imprisonment is reserved for serious infractions, such as those leading to death or serious bodily injury or obstruction of authorities in performing their duties. The decriminalization of various offences is in stark contrast with the existing laws, which prescribe imprisonment even for general minor non-compliances. The OSH code also provides for compounding. This is a new concept which has been introduced in the OSH code, similar to the other codes, and this compounding for certain offences, either before or after an inquiry is held or prosecution is initiated, by paying 50% of the maximum penalty in case of and 75% of the maximum fine in case of an offence. Similar to the wages code and the social security code, the OSH code also envisages the role of an inspector cum facilitator in place of only an inspector. This change is in keeping with the code on wages and with the objective of giving advice to employers and workers relating to compliances under the OSH code. Coming to jurisdictions, the OSH code has also specifically excluded the jurisdiction of civil courts in respect of any matter to which the OSH code applies, and specifically sets out that no injunction is to be granted by a civil court in respect of anything done or intended to be done under the OSH code. This is basically a modification brought about under the OSH code, leaving employers and employees, the only recourse available to employers and employees would be to go to the authorities prescribed under the OSH code. Now, coming to the last slide. Last slide is basically we have discussed the key impacts of the key changes as we discussed earlier under the OSH code, and these key impacts are basically ease of business for startups, since because of the introduction of scheme for startup establishments, then joint and several liabilities, as now the employees are also duty bound to take reasonable care for the health, safety of themselves, others, as may be affected by their acts and omissions. Then, of course, there is a great reduction in administrative burden on account of introduction of common registrations, common licenses, unification of registers, digitalization. And in terms of when the OSH code will be enforced, OSH code has been given a presidential assent, and as per public statements made by officials of the Ministry of Labor and Employment, we foresee the OSH code to come into effect by 2021. Additionally, the draft rules have also been presented for public comments, and now it will be interesting to see how the various state rules would be consolidated under one central rule. With this, we come to at the end of the session, and we want to thank everyone for taking out the time for this session, and also thank you to the entire Taxman team for organizing this session.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav, for your presentation. As we bring our today's session of webinar to a close, we once again thank you all. Thanks to our panelists and the wonderful audience for allowing us to be here this afternoon. and hope that this activity has given you a much clearer understanding of the new labor laws. Thank you all.